It's very fitting that the release of the Mueller report is timed with the Easter weekend, because as soon as you think this narrative is finally dead, behold, it is risen, collusion, obstruction, and the holy ghost of shifting goalposts to get this president on ever weaker terms, regardless of whatever the evidence may say, or regardless of the lack of evidence, for that matter. I had naively hoped that the release of this report would be a turning point after this years-long distraction, a time for all of us to come together as a country and move on to things that are beneficial and productive for us all. But instead, the believers are resilient, the faith shall not be broken, and they're determined to resurrect their prophecy. To summarize the over 400-page report covering years of investigation that is apparently still not enough investigation, we gotta have more. Mueller is crystal clear on the original charge behind this whole circus, alleged Russian collusion to steal the 2016 election. Quote, "The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities." So knock down the original goalpost, but of course, as the collusion narrative has weakened over time, that goalpost has shifted to obstruction, that Trump interfered with the investigation. And as we heard from Attorney General Bill Barr's summary of the report a few weeks ago, Mueller is less clear on that front, but he does not make an affirmative conclusion. Mueller investigated several events that could theoretically constitute obstruction of the investigation, but ultimately he does not conclude that the president committed a crime. However, and this is the language we'll keep hearing referenced from the faithful, Mueller's report also does not exonerate Trump. Mueller writes, quote, "If we had confidence that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. But the trouble is, if I assign guilt on that basis, that's a reversal of the presumption of innocence. We don't prove innocence in this country. You are presumed innocent until proven guilty. If I had confidence that Mueller isn't a murderer, I would so state." Yeah, that's not how it works. If I accuse you of something, the burden is on me to prove it, not on you to prove your innocence. But I shouldn't impugn Mueller too much here. I jokingly accuse him just to illustrate the point, not to say that he necessarily is a bad actor. There is a valid reason why he wouldn't make a prosecutorial recommendation. As Mueller describes in the report, the Justice Department has long established that you can't indict a sitting president because it burdens the president's capacity to govern and violates constitutional separation of powers. If the president commits a crime, the proper legal remedy would be impeachment through Congress and any potential criminal prosecution after his removal from office. So what we're left with is Justice Department precedent that precludes Mueller from making a charge with a definitive finding that there was in fact no underlying crime, but an open window for a narrative that politicians and media are now seizing, as Shapiro rightly describes, that the cover-up is worse than the non-crime. Well, what are you covering up if there is in fact no underlying crime to cover up in the first place? Who cares? It's a way to prolong this carnival and invite yet more investigation.
The facts that are now established by this report are damning. Whether they could or should have resulted in the indictment of the president or people around him, they are damning.
This report is far from the end of the inquiry that this country needs and deserves.
And the responsibility now falls to Congress to hold the president accountable for his actions.
And it's clear more investigation is the way this is going to go. Democrats are already planning to get Mueller to testify on the Hill. They're demanding an unredacted copy of the report, despite the fact that the redactions in the publicly available one are perfectly valid, and despite the fact that AG Bill Barr says, fine, I'll give you more information confidentially, it's no problem. They're still going to make a show of it. And of course, the further fringes of the Democratic Party are considering impeachment proceedings because, after all, that's where the Mueller report leads. Oh, it's in there. You just got to squint extra hard, so hard that the rest of the inconvenient factual information in the report is no longer readable. All of this is the context for me rolling out of bed on Friday morning and turning on the news, as I always do, and I don't know how or why I'm still surprised by the slant and the outright deception of supposedly objective news coverage, but this particular piece on the Today Show had me reacting out loud right from the start.
The report's most damaging details on obstruction of justice and the president's repeated efforts to sabotage the the Russia inquiry, often through White House aides.
I heard this sabotage language and I thought, wow, that's pretty strong. I know I haven't done the most thorough reading of the Mueller report possible. Admittedly, I've skimmed. So I got to see the context in which Mueller called Trump's actions sabotage. Now, let's see. Open up the report, search the document for sabotage, and nope, doesn't appear even once in all 448 pages. But yes, show it highlighted and torn in your graphic as though it's an excerpt from the document, when in fact, you actually just made that up. Regardless, what's your evidence for the supposed sabotage of the investigation?
Mueller names at least 10 current and former administration officials or associates who defied the president's orders. Among them, White House counsel Don McGahn, who resisted the president's order to remove Mueller, deciding he would rather resign than participate in another Saturday night massacre. According to the report, President Trump also asked his former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, to tell then Attorney General Jeff Sessions to publicly announce the investigation was unfair to the president. Lewandowski never delivered that message.
Okay, so just to recap, talking about things that didn't actually happen, and even if they did, aren't clearly crimes at all. Anything else?
Mueller reveals the president's reaction in the Oval Office nearly 2 years ago when he first learned about the appointment of a special counsel, writing based on notes from an official in the room that he slumped back in his chair and said, "Oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I'm effed."
Well, saying I'm effed doesn't necessarily mean he's effed. You still have to provide evidence for the effing. And after minutes of scrambling, they finally arrive at the relevant question. Given all of this supposed evidence, as we're calling it, how is it possible that Mueller couldn't connect the dots to obstruction?
How could it be, after 2 years, that Robert Mueller was unable to find some sort of connection, some sort of obstruction connection?
And the answer, of course, as they actually correctly report, is that DOJ precedent says you don't indict a sitting president.
Because a long-standing Justice Department policy says a president can't be indicted, the team concluded they couldn't even reach the point of deciding whether the evidence showed he committed a crime.
But this is where it goes truly off the rails. They bring in these analysts to tell us of Mueller's true intent, because despite exonerating Trump on the primary charge of Russian collusion, the entire reason this investigation ever existed to allegedly obstruct in the first place, now Mueller is sending us secret messages to decode about how Trump should be brought to justice. We just need these Mueller whisperers to relay that message to us.
What the Mueller report says is basically tease it up for Congress to investigate. We heard Pelosi saying that's what she's going to do. And then there's this footnote in the opinion, footnote 1091, in which Mueller says, look, even apart from impeachment, we could go after the president after he leaves office. So a sitting president can't be indicted, but an ex-president can go to jail.
These are just descriptions of how the process unfolds if there is a crime to prosecute. It's not Mueller recommending that this process occur. Mueller notes that it's not the Justice Department's role to make a criminal charge against the president. That's for Congress to do. And once removed from office, that president would be subject to criminal prosecution just like anybody else. That's the footnote he references. But this is Mueller explaining two things. One, why it would be inappropriate for him to make a prosecutorial recommendation, and two, how this process should play out according to Justice Department precedent if there is in fact a crime in play. But that's just it. All of this assumes there is a criminal charge to prosecute. But the report doesn't demonstrate that, and at no point does the report recommend that this process actually happen. You have to infer that intent and assign it to Mueller, but it's being reported as though that's what he's advocating. He is not. He's making a description, not a recommendation.
Do you read the report as Mueller saying explicitly or implicitly that this is a matter for Congress because he is forbade by these rules from doing anything in the Justice Department?
It's definitely implicit, and I think Mueller was following the path of his predecessors, the special prosecutor in Watergate, Leon Jaworski, the independent prosecutor for Monica Lewinsky, Ken Starr. Both of them wrote reports to Congress in which they didn't expressly say impeach or not. They just laid out the evidence, even when the evidence was so damning with Nixon, and the evidence yesterday was quite damning against the president, but they're leaving it up to Congress to decide.
But in both of those cases, there was an underlying crime. Clinton made a perjurious statement about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. Nixon was a party to a break-in and wiretapping of political opponents. Clinton's crime was not being mad about the Lewinsky scandal and yelling at his staff to make it go away. It's that he lied in sworn testimony. Nixon's crime wasn't saying angry things about the Watergate investigation. It's that he spied on political opposition, or at least his campaign did on his behalf, and he tried to cover it up. There is no underlying crime in this case, as explicitly explained within the Mueller report, but I'm supposed to reject that explicit finding in favor of secret messages that you need a decoder ring to read. And even if I did debunk that narrative, it still wouldn't matter, because that's just one mole to whack in their infinite supply of carnival games that are rigged to deny the one piece of obvious reality these people will never, ever accept: that Donald Trump is a legitimate president elected fairly by people who disagree with them, and it's time to move on for the prosperity of the country. There's a simple test to evaluate whether you're being fair and objective with your opinion and your analysis. Ask yourself, is there any information or evidence that I could be provided with that would make me change my mind? Is my opinion falsifiable? If yes, good for you. You're guided by evidence and reason. If not, you're guided by dogma, and oddly enough, faith. And I don't say that to take a shot at religious people. Not at all. Faith has its place. I just find it odd that if you had to pick one principle of faith to organize your life around, you'd pick President Trump is somehow, some way, illegitimate. We're watching the fracture of the reasonable from the cultists in real time. I hope you ditched the Kool-Aid a long time ago, but if you haven't yet, now would be a great time to put down that solo cup and move on with your life. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to come hang out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.